He wasn't searching for legends that morning, just a missing lamb beneath the silent Colorado pines. But through the mist and melting snow, he saw it a colossal wolfdog fur, like shadow, and eyes burning gold, trapped and terrified. One boy, barely tall enough to reach its shoulder, chose courage over fear. In that moment, the line between wild and human blurred forever. If you stood face to face with a creature born of myth, would you dare to reach out your hand or turn away? Share your answer in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you would do. In the farthest reaches of northern Colorado, winter is not merely a season. It is a presence, a silent, crystalline entity that settles over the world and hushes all but the most determined souls. On this January morning, White Pine Village slumbered under a heavy blanket of snow, the sky still the color of pewter as dawn crept behind the jagged silhouette of the Rockies. Frost limned the window panes of every modest home, turning even the humblest wood cabin into a palace of glass. In the Miller family's old ranch house, paint-flaking windows warped with years, 7-year-old Ethan Miller pressed his nose to the cold glass, searching the snowy horizon for any sign of movement. Ethan was a slight boy, all elbows and knees, with an unruly mop of dark blonde hair that refused to stay combed. His eyes, large and a little too old for his freckled face, were the gray-green of pine needles. There was a patience in him, uncommon for his age, a gentle, quiet way of observing the world inherited perhaps from the soft sadness that often drifted across his father's face in the evenings. Life had changed for Ethan since last summer, when a rogue coyote attack took several sheep and left his father Luke Miller more withdrawn than ever. Luke Miller was a man shaped by work and loss. In his mid-40s, tall but slightly stooped from years of bending over fences and tools, he wore his thick dark beard as both armor and shield. His hands, calloused and cracked, moved with surprising gentleness around his sheep, or his only child, yet his blue eyes rarely lingered long on anything joyful. A widower for 5 years, Luke's love was quiet and fierce, wrapped in the rituals of caring for land and family, never extravagant, always present. The only person who sometimes broke through his reserve was his wife Hannah, whose spirit still haunted the house in quiet ways, the scent of dried lavender in the kitchen, a faded painting of the valley above the mantel, Ethan's smile. On this morning, as the weak sun bled through clouds and painted the snowy fields with pale gold, Ethan's world tilted on the axis of a single worry. He was missing a lamb. The little ewe, born late in the season and always prone to wandering, had not come in with the flock the previous night. Luke had said, "She'll find her way," but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. So bundled into a scarlet hand-me-down parka, 2 sizes too big wool mittens, and boots clumsy with patches, Ethan slipped out the back door while his father dozed in a kitchen chair. The air bit his cheeks, the world crisp and quiet except for the distant call of a jay. Ethan trudged across the yard past the sagging barn, its faded red sides bowed with age, and out through the fence where the snowy expanse rolled away toward the woods. As he walked, Ethan's mind drifted. He was used to being alone, a little solitary shadow in the schoolyard, small for his age, too gentle for the rougher games. Most of the other boys teased him for bringing animal books to lunch or for talking to the barn cats like old friends. But animals at least never laughed at him. They listened. He followed tiny hoofprints through the snow, weaving between tufts of sage and the brown skeletons of summer grass. The trail led him deeper into the woods, where snow lay heavy on every branch. A sudden distant noise shattered the peace, a sharp crack unmistakable in the cold air. A gunshot. Ethan froze. Then another. The birds scattered wings, drumming against the sky. From beyond a curtain of pines, voices echoed, rough and urgent. 3 men emerged broad-shouldered, dressed in mismatched camouflage and heavy boots, rifles slung awkwardly. One of them, his beard frosted with ice, caught sight of Ethan. This was Tom Sutter, a longtime villager known for his booming laugh and his quick temper. He was in his 50s, thick-set with a red face that was usually kind, but now twisted with worry. "Kid, back away," he barked, voice edged with panic. "That thing's not safe." Ethan glanced beyond them, heart pounding. Just past the hunters, up on a low ridge, stood a steel animal trap, one of the old brutal kind his father hated. Inside, barely visible behind the chain-link mesh, something dark and massive moved. It paced, limping, anxious yellow eyes burning through the dawn light. As the men argued, one wanting to shoot another, cautioning patience, Ethan felt pulled forward by a force he couldn't name. The animal behind the fence was no ordinary wolf. Even through the mesh, he could sense its strength, its size, its pain. Its fur, thick and deep gray with streaks of black and silver, was matted with blood along one flank. Its head was broad ears, sharply pointed, and eyes like molten amber eyes that for a flickering instant seemed to look straight into Ethan's heart. Something in the way the creature held itself, not wild, but wary, not threatening, but exhausted, spoke to the same lonely place in Ethan that had never quite healed after losing his mother. Instead of stepping back, Ethan took a trembling step forward. Behind him, Tom cursed, and one of the other men, a thin, nervous younger hunter named Dennis Clark, raised his rifle, but his hands shook. Dennis was the youngest son of a rancher more familiar with machinery than animals, always anxious to please. His brown hair stuck out from beneath a wool hat. His eyes darted from the boy to the trap. "Don't shoot," Ethan said, voice steady, despite his terror. "He's hurt. He's scared." The wolfdog, because now close enough, Ethan saw the animal was something between the two, stopped pacing. It watched him breathing hard, each exhale a puff of steam. A third man, Roy Jenkins, older and kinder, with sad eyes and a limp from an old rodeo accident, put a hand on Dennis's arm. "Let the boy try. Maybe it'll calm him." Ethan knelt in the snow, careful and slow, never breaking eye contact. He spoke not words, but soft murmurs, the same way he soothed the lambs in the barn. The animal listened. Its ears twitched. Inch by inch, Ethan edged closer, stopping just outside the trap's reach. With shaking hands, he fumbled the ancient latch. "It's okay," he whispered. "You're not alone. I promise." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the wolfdog limped forward, collapsed just inside the door, too weak to run. Ethan's heart ached at the sight the animal's ribs showed under thick fur. One paw bloodied and twisted at an odd angle. The boy took off his mitten and, against all logic, stretched his bare hand toward the animal's muzzle. The wolfdog sniffed, flinched, then pressed its cold nose into his palm. Tom grunted in disbelief. "Well, I'll be." Ethan worked the latch, opened the door wider, and the great animal dragged itself out, limping, leaning into the boy's side eyes, never leaving Ethan's. "We need to get him home," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper, but full of resolve. The men nodded, a little awed by what they had witnessed. As Ethan led the wounded animal Sable, he would name him later through the snow toward the edge of the woods. The first true sunlight broke through the clouds. It shimmered on the snow, turning every frozen branch to silver, and for the first time all winter, Ethan felt warmth blooming quietly in his chest. The day after Ethan rescued the injured wolfdog from the jaws of the old steel trap, the landscape of White Pine Village seemed softer, as if the blizzard's bite had lost its edge. Snow still blanketed the fields and rooftops, but the air was milder, and sunbeams filtered through the clouds, turning icicles to dripping glass. In the Miller household, the mood had shifted as well. Ethan moved differently. There was a quickness to his step, a brightness in his eyes that neither his father Luke nor any of the ranch hands had seen in a long while. Ethan had named his secret companion Sable, after the deep, shadowy gray of the animal's fur. Sable was still weak, his body trembling with every effort, and his right hind leg bore a deep wound that oozed when he moved. Ethan knew he couldn't leave Sable outside to freeze or attract attention, so he led the animal under cover of the late afternoon sun to the dilapidated shed at the back of the property. Once a storage space for hay, the shed now stood half empty, its door hanging crookedly on rusty hinges, offering privacy and shelter. Inside, Ethan set up a makeshift bed of straw and old horse blankets. Sable curled up gratefully, eyes never leaving the boy, nostrils flaring as he inhaled Ethan's scent. There was an understanding in that gaze, an almost human intelligence yet touched by wildness. Ethan sat beside him, speaking softly, telling stories of lost sheep and lonely days, his words weaving a fragile sense of safety around them both. That evening, Luke Miller noticed his son's strange new energy. At dinner, Ethan ate quickly and excused himself, muttering about needing to check something in the barn. Luke watched him go, a line of concern cutting through his tired face. Years of loss had taught Luke to be cautious with hope. He remembered when his wife Hannah was alive, how Ethan would chatter non-stop at the table, his laughter bright and unburdened. Since her passing, Ethan had grown quieter, more withdrawn. Lately, though, something was changing. Maybe it was just the return of lambing season, or perhaps something else was thawing inside his son. Later that night, as the house creaked in the wind and moonlight spilled across the floor, Ethan tiptoed out with a small pot of warm broth and bandages he'd borrowed from the kitchen. The walk to the shed felt longer in the dark shadows, playing tricks on his nerves, but Sable was waiting, tail thumping weakly against the straw. Ethan tended the animal's wound, his hands clumsy but careful. Sable winced but never snapped, only watched him with those deep amber eyes. Over the next days, a new routine blossomed in secret. Ethan spent every spare moment in the shed, feeding Sable scraps, changing dressings, and talking to him about everything: school, the farm, his dreams. Sable began to recover appetite, growing strength returning in slow increments. His fur gleamed in the weak winter sun, and his once dull eyes sparkled with alertness. The wound, though still raw, began to knit together. Meanwhile, Ethan's life outside the shed was changing too. At school, his classmates noticed he smiled more sometimes, even joining in a game of tag or answering questions out loud. He was still quiet, still the boy who preferred animal books and watched the crows from the window. But there was a subtle shift in the way he carried himself. Even Mrs. Benson, his teacher, a tall, silver-haired woman with a gentle but no-nonsense air, remarked on his newfound confidence. She'd always had a soft spot for Ethan, seeing in him a spark others missed, though she worried about his loneliness. The only person who seemed to suspect something was amiss was Mrs. Ruth Harper, the Millers' nearest neighbor. Ruth was a widow in her early 60s, with a shock of iron-gray hair, usually twisted into a loose bun, and sharp, perceptive blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Petite and wiry, she moved with the precision of someone who'd spent a lifetime working land and livestock. Ruth had been a friend to the Miller family since before Ethan was born, helping with lambing and bringing over jars of homemade preserves. Since her husband's passing, she spent her evenings knitting by her window, sipping tea, and watching the fields for trouble. One afternoon, as Ethan trudged back from school, Ruth met him at the edge of the road, waving her cane. "Saw you out by the shed this morning," she said, voice brisk but not unkind. "Lost something out there." Ethan hesitated, clutching his backpack tighter, eyes darting toward the barn. "Just looking for tracks. Thought I saw a fox." Ruth eyed him for a long moment, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Well, if you find him, tell him to stay out of my chickens." With a wink, she let him go, but Ethan felt her gaze lingering on his back, all the way to the house. That evening, as dusk fell over the snowbound ranch, a new challenge presented itself. One of the older ranch hands, a big-chested man named Paul Reed, lumbered into the kitchen with an air of urgency. Paul was in his 30s, strong and sturdy, with a thick brown beard and a laugh that rumbled like thunder. Usually good-natured, Paul prided himself on knowing every inch of the property. "Luke," he said, "something's been spooking the sheep at night. Found tufts of wool by the fence and tracks in the snow, big ones. Bigger than a coyote." Luke frowned concern, etching deeper lines into his brow. "Mountain lion, maybe?" Paul shook his head. "Don't think so. Looks different. Could be a stray dog, but I've never seen tracks like this." Ethan, who was quietly listening in the corner, felt his stomach twist with worry. If anyone discovered Sable, it would mean trouble. That night, while checking on Sable, Ethan noticed the animal's ears pricking at every distant sound, nose twitching. Sable's instincts were sharper, his senses alert even in exhaustion. Ethan whispered, "You're safe here," though he wasn't entirely sure. As Sable's strength returned, he began pacing the confines of the shed, anxious, restless, sometimes howling softly into the darkness. The noise drew the attention of the barn cats, who prowled around outside, tails bristling. One in particular, a calico called Trixie, known for her swagger and disdain, sat on the windowsill hissing when Sable came too close. Despite the risks, Ethan's attachment grew stronger. He began sneaking out with more food, even a woolen blanket filched from his own bed. In Sable, Ethan found not just a friend, but a confidant. He talked about his mother, how she used to sing to him at bedtime, how quiet the house had become without her. Sable listened sometimes, resting his great head on Ethan's lap, as if understanding every word. Meanwhile, Ruth Harper became increasingly suspicious. She noticed food supplies running low and spotted strange footprints near the back shed. One icy morning, she approached Luke while he was mending a fence. "You ought to check your outbuildings," she advised. "Something's been getting in." Luke, distracted and tired, only nodded, but the warning planted a seed of doubt. That evening, Ethan returned from the shed to find his father waiting by the back door. Luke's eyes were tired but gentle. "You've been spending a lot of time out there," he said. "Is there something I should know?" Ethan hesitated, torn between truth and the need to protect his secret friend. In the end, he shook his head, mumbling about wanting to help with chores. The chapter closes as another cold night falls on White Pine. Ethan sits beside Sable in the dim glow of a lantern, stroking the animal's thick fur, promising softly, "I'll keep you safe." Outside, the wind rises, rattling the bare branches, while Ruth Harper's lamp burns late into the night as she pens a letter to her niece, the town's veterinarian, hinting that something strange is afoot on the Miller Ranch. Winter lingered long in White Pine Village, the snow crusted and old glinting beneath a sky of hard blue as February unfolded. The Miller Ranch sat at the village's edge, like a ship run aground in a white-capped sea. Though the sun returned a little earlier each morning, the cold clung stubbornly to every fence post and leafless cottonwood. The world was both silent and waiting, as if it knew secrets were buried beneath the drifts. Ethan Miller, only 7, but carrying worries far older, moved through these days with the carefulness of someone guarding a treasure. Sable had regained much of his strength. The great Wolfdog's wound, thanks to Ethan's diligent cleaning and nightly whispered reassurances, had closed into a red, puckered scar. Sable's gait still favored his right hind leg, but his eyes were bright now, full of watchfulness, trust, and something Ethan sometimes thought was gratitude. Their bond deepened. If Ethan came late, Sable whined. If Ethan was sad, Sable pressed his huge head against the boy's shoulder and exhaled a warm, wolfy sigh. But secrets in a village as small as White Pine are like foxes. They slip under doors, leave prints where you least expect. Ruth Harper's suspicions only grew. One evening, as dusk fell in smoky ribbons over the fields, Ruth's niece arrived, Grace Harper, the local veterinarian. Grace was in her late 20s, tall and lean, with a no-nonsense stride and copper hair pulled into a practical ponytail. Her hazel eyes, flecked with green, were quick to scan and quicker to judge. Years of emergencies and heartaches had shaped her a blend of steely competence and gentle humor. When she stepped out of her battered pickup, her boots left crisp imprints on the frosty ground. She wore her father's old ranch coat sleeves a little too long and a faint perpetual sunburn on her nose that made her look younger than her years. Ruth greeted her with a brisk hug. "Something's not right next door. Food goes missing, tracks everywhere, and Ethan's been acting brighter." She said the last word as if it were both suspicious and hopeful. Grace smiled, remembering Ethan as a sad-eyed boy who once left a handmade card at her clinic after she'd helped nurse an injured fawn. "I'll take a look. Maybe they've got a stray hanging around." Ruth eyed her. "Or maybe it's more than that." Meanwhile, Ethan's own vigilance grew. He'd started skipping after-school games to rush home anxious that Sable might be discovered. One afternoon, as he hurried down the snowy lane, he spotted someone standing by the miller's front gate. It was Mrs. Benson, his teacher. Her height always seemed imposing to Ethan, but her smile was warm, softening her angular features. She wore a deep blue coat and carried a battered satchel full of graded papers. Mrs. Benson had always watched Ethan with a kind of protective curiosity. She knew grief, having lost her husband years before. She'd seen in his silence echoes of her own son's struggle after that loss. "Good afternoon, Ethan," she greeted, her voice gentle. "Your father says you've been helping more around the farm." Ethan nodded, shifting from foot to foot, uncertain what to say. "I just like the animals." Mrs. Benson smiled. "That's a gift. Animals listen better than most people, don't they?" She let the moment settle, then handed him a small book. "Wild Neighbors, the Hidden World of Forest Creatures. Thought you might enjoy this. And don't be afraid to ask for help if you find a wild animal in trouble, all right?" Her gaze lingered knowing and kind. Ethan swallowed heart-thumping and thanked her. That evening, Grace arrived at the Miller Ranch under the pretense of checking a pregnant ewe. Luke greeted her with the distracted politeness he gave to most neighbors. Grace exchanged pleasantries, then made her way around the barns, keeping her eyes sharp for any sign of trouble. She found odd footprints, large wolfish, and tufts of gray-black fur caught on a loose nail near the shed. Grace frowned, her veterinary training stirring both concern and curiosity. The tracks were fresh, the fur far too coarse for any sheepdog. Inside the shed, Sable sensed something different in the air. He pressed himself to the back, silent and unmoving, only his amber eyes visible in the shadows. When Ethan arrived with supper, Sable greeted him with an anxious whine. Ethan crouched and whispered, "Someone was here." The wolfdog nuzzled his hand as if to warn him. That night, the Miller Ranch buzzed with tension. Paul Reed, the ranch hand, had spent the afternoon shoring up the sheep fences. He was joined by his younger cousin Benny, a wiry, quick-talking 19-year-old with an easy grin and a scatter of acne across his cheeks. Benny, eager to impress, regaled Paul with stories about wild animals he'd seen up north and speculated loudly about mountain lions and bears. Paul only grunted, but Benny's boasting drew Luke's attention. "We're not calling animal control for every shadow," Luke said, but his eyes lingered on Ethan as if he wondered what his son knew. Later, as Grace walked home past the Miller place, she paused at the shed. A pair of eyes glinted at her from the darkness, intelligent, watchful. Grace's breath caught, but she kept her distance, recognizing that the animal, whatever it was, didn't threaten her. Instead, it seemed to be guarding something precious. Over the next days, Ruth, Grace, and even Mrs. Benson watched the Miller Ranch closely, each piecing together their own theory. Grace returned with her vet's kit and a pretense of helping with a sick lamb, but she lingered around the shed, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious animal. Meanwhile, Ethan began to worry his secret would soon be revealed. He confided in Sable, voice trembling. "If anyone finds you, they might take you away. I won't let that happen." Sable rested his head on Ethan's knee. That moment, the shed's door creaked open. It was Grace, her face careful, her movements slow. "Ethan," she said quietly, "I think you have something you want to show me." Ethan hesitated, then nodded, heart pounding. Grace knelt, meeting his frightened eyes with steady calm. "I'm here to help. Let me look at him." She spoke gently, extending a hand for Sable to sniff. The wolfdog watched her warily, then allowed her to examine his scar. Grace worked quickly, assessing the wound her fingers practiced. And sure. "He's lucky to have you," she whispered, cleaning the last of the crusted blood and applying a new bandage from her kit. She didn't scold Ethan or warn him. Instead, she asked, "Does he have a name?" "Sable," Ethan replied, voice very small. "Like the night." Grace smiled. "That's a good name." She stood, eyes kind. "Keep him hidden for now. Let me see what I can find out about his kind." She left, promising to return with supplies. As the sky faded to indigo, Ethan sat beside Sable, feeling relief for the first time. Someone else knew, and for now it felt like help, not danger. A week passed, and winter's grip began to loosen ever so slightly over White Pine Village. Icicles dwindled into thin, shining daggers, and the snow on the rooftops slouched toward slush under the pale sunlight. Yet the hush that covered the Miller Ranch was now mixed with something sharper than cold suspicion, the kind that breeds in close-knit places. As if the village itself could sense that, behind the old barn and the sagging shed, a secret pulsed and grew. Ethan moved through his days with anxious purpose, always thinking 2 steps ahead. At school, he nodded politely when spoken to, keeping his stories about Sable tucked away behind nervous smiles. But the relief that Grace Harper now knew the truth and had chosen to help rather than expose gave him a quiet strength. When Grace visited, she arrived with supplies tucked in her vet bag, antiseptics, gauze, even special salve for Sable's paw. She made her visits look routine, chatting about the sheep or lambing, but when they were alone in the shed, her touch was gentle, her voice reassuring. Grace's presence became a thread of hope for Ethan. She kept her copper hair bundled under a wool cap and wore the same patched ranch coat boots caked in mud from her daily rounds. She always brought a new story about the wild animals she'd treated, foxes tangled in barbed wire and owl rescued from the road. Ethan listened wide-eyed, absorbing every detail. Sometimes Sable would rest his heavy head in Grace's lap, blinking his amber eyes at her, as if understanding every word. Ruth Harper, however, grew more restless. Her sharp blue eyes missed little, and she spent more and more afternoons walking her property's fence line, peering over at the Millers' outbuildings with her cane in hand. She questioned Luke about odd noises at night and missing food, her tone half concerned, half accusatory. Luke, worn and distracted, brushed her off with polite patience. But Ruth's suspicion was contagious. In the post office, she whispered with other villagers, old Mr. Crenshaw, the grocer's wife, Alice, even Paul Reed's mother. The word wolf began to drift in the air sometimes in jest, sometimes with genuine worry. Paul Reed and his cousin Benny, eager to prove themselves, decided to set a few extra traps at the edge of the Miller property, just in case. They told Luke it was for coyotes, but Ethan overheard them arguing about something bigger. That night, Ethan slipped from bed and ran barefoot across the frozen yard to check the traps himself, his heart pounding as he disabled them, fingers burning with cold. At school, Mrs. Benson noticed Ethan's distraction. One afternoon after class, she invited him to stay and help stack books. She was organizing a shelf of old wildlife encyclopedias and placed a worn volume in his hands. "You remind me of my son Ethan. He used to worry about everything animals, whether what the neighbors thought. He learned, though, that sometimes the best way to help is to trust a friend." Her voice was gentle, but her eyes were searching. Ethan flushed, sensing she knew more than she let on. The mounting tension soon reached its peak. One chilly morning, Ruth arrived at the Miller Ranch with Grace in tow. Ruth's stride was brisk, her jaw set. "Luke, I want to see what's in that shed," she declared. Grace's eyes flicked to Ethan, who stood frozen in the yard. Luke, blindsided and weary, gave a tired sigh, but led the way. The shed's door creaked open. Inside, Sable lay curled in the hay, his coat now healthy and thick, the wound on his leg much improved. He rose when the door opened, Hackle's lifting eyes wary but calm. Grace stepped forward. Hands raised, her voice soothing. "He's not dangerous, Ruth. He's hurt and he trusts Ethan. I've been treating him. He's special." Ruth's sharp gaze moved from the Wolfdog to Ethan and back. She saw the bond in the way Sable pressed his head against Ethan's side, the way Ethan's small hand rested on the great beast's neck. "This isn't a dog," Ruth said, voice thin with emotion. "This is wild." She looked to Luke, to Grace. If anyone in town finds out, Grace spoke, her voice steady and clear. "He's part dog, part wolf. And I ran some tests. I want to do more, find out exactly what he is. But he's not a threat. If anything, he's safer with Ethan than anywhere else. Ruth hesitated, her expression wrestling between fear and understanding. Luke, for the first time, truly looked at his son, not just as the small, quiet boy who needed protecting, but as someone capable of courage and kindness. If Ethan says he's safe, then that's enough for me. But we have to be careful. They left the shed in silence, tension hanging heavy in the air. Grace lingered behind, placing a gentle hand on Ruth's arm. I'll take full responsibility. Let's keep this quiet until we know more. That night, Ethan sat in the shed with Sable, whispering his gratitude. Sable, understanding more than any animal aught, closed his eyes and leaned into Ethan's touch. In that circle of hay and lamplight, Ethan felt the weight of fear easing, replaced by the quiet power of loyalty and trust. But outside, as darkness thickened over the Miller Ranch, Paul and Benny's traps glittered with frost, and Ruth's window glowed late into the night. The secret for now was safe, but the village was listening, and winter was not yet done with its tests. The following days in White Pine Village dawned gray and uneasy. Melting snow trickled along muddy ruts in the ranch road, pooling around boots at the doorstep and carrying whispers from neighbor to neighbor. In small towns, secrets never truly stay hidden. They slip out like thaw water, finding cracks no one expects. Inside the Miller house, Ethan felt the growing strain. Luke Miller tried to focus on spring chores, but his brow furrowed deeper each time a vehicle slowed by their lane or a neighbor called from the fence. Ruth Harper kept her visits brief, now her eyes sharper than ever. She'd promised to keep the secret, but the knowledge had settled inside her like a stone. She no longer brought over fresh bread or stayed to chat, always glancing toward the shed as if expecting a shadow to move. Grace Harper grew more involved, spending late evenings researching and cross-referencing Sable's unusual genetics. She took discrete samples fur saliva blood under the guise of tending to a sheep's injury, then drove them to her small clinic where she pored over them until the lamps burned low. Grace's copper hair had grown wild around her face, her cheeks always a little flushed from lack of sleep, and her voice was quick with excitement when she spoke to Ethan. "He's extraordinary," she said one afternoon as they bandaged Sable's leg together. "He's got the calm of a dog, but the senses of a wolf. There's a story in every cell." Ethan beamed, pride warming him, even as anxiety twisted in his chest. Sable, for his part, seemed to sense the tension. He prowled the shed at dusk, ears pricked at every distant sound. When Ethan was near, he relaxed, sprawling at the boy's feet, or letting Ethan rest his head on his thick neck. But if voices rose nearby, Sable went silent and watchful, hiding deep in the straw. It was Benny, the brash 19-year-old cousin, who came closest to disaster. One late afternoon after chores, Benny wandered toward the shed on a dare from Paul, claiming he'd heard strange noises. Benny's walk was cocky, but his nerves frayed as he drew closer and picked up the scent of wildness on the air. Ethan, seeing him through the kitchen window, sprinted outside and blocked the door, feigning nonchalance. "Lost a soccer ball?" Ethan lied. Benny squinted at him, suspicion clouding his freckled face, but then shrugged and stalked off, muttering about kids and their secrets. That night, Ethan hardly slept. He dreamed of men in uniforms and barking dogs, of Sable caught in traps, and strangers shining lights into the shed. The next morning, the household was on edge. Paul and Benny debated calling animal control, citing something dangerous prowling the ranch. Luke stood his ground, insisting the sheep were unharmed and warning them not to meddle. But the village's mood had shifted. In the general store, Alice, the grocer's wife, spoke in worried tones about wolves in the hills. Old Mr. Crenshaw mentioned the howl he'd heard in the wind. Even Mrs. Benson, who had quietly watched over Ethan at school, asked if everything was all right at home. The sense of threat pressed in on all sides. It was Grace who offered a solution, sitting with Ethan and Luke in the kitchen after supper. "We can't keep him hidden forever," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Sable deserves safety. And so do you, Ethan. I know a place, Wild Spirit Sanctuary near the state forest. They take in wolves, wolf dogs, even hybrids. No cages, just forest and people who care." Grace's hazel eyes pleaded for understanding. If the wrong person finds him, animal control will do worse than move him. Ethan's heart clenched. The thought of losing Sable felt like losing his mother all over again. "Can't he stay?" Ethan asked, voice barely above a whisper. "I'll take care of him. He's not a monster." Grace squeezed his hand. "I know he's not. But this isn't just about us now. The town is afraid. Sable deserves to be somewhere he can run, not hide." Luke's face was drawn and tired. He'd fought so hard to keep his son safe, to build something resembling a home again. "If it's the only way," he said, "at last, we'll do what's best for him." Word spread that the Millers would be releasing an animal to the sanctuary. Paul and Benny watched with something like envy as Grace helped Ethan lead Sable to the waiting van. Sable walked with his head-high, senses alert, as if understanding the gravity of the moment. Ruth Harper, standing in her yard, raised a hand in silent farewell. Ethan climbed into the back beside Sable, hugging the Wolfdog's great neck as the van rumbled away. Grace drove in silence, her expression set and determined. The sanctuary was an hour outside town, nestled against the dense pines of the state forest. When they arrived, Monica Pierce, the director, greeted them. Monica was a broad-shouldered woman in her late 40s, with sun-weathered skin and a voice deepened by years of calling across canyons. Her handshake was firm, and her eyes bright with intelligence. She crouched low to greet Sable, letting him sniff her palm. "We'll take good care of him," she promised Ethan, then looked up, her smile kind. "And you're always welcome to visit." Ethan watched as Sable was led through the tall wooden gate into a snowy enclosure that stretched to the forest's edge. Sable paused, turned, and locked eyes with Ethan a long, silent moment. Then he slipped away into the tree's shadow and snow blending as one. The ride home was quiet. Ethan pressed his face to the window, watching the pines blur by holding the memory of Sable's amber eyes close to his heart. That night, as the first stars broke through the thinning clouds, Ethan stood at his bedroom window and whispered a promise into the darkness. "I'll see you again. I won't forget." The world seemed quieter after Sable's departure, as if the hush of winter had seeped into the very bones of the Miller house. Ethan moved through the days like a ghost, his footsteps soft on the old pine floors, his laughter now only a memory that flickered in the cold. Though the thaw had finally begun in White Pine Village, patches of brown earth showing through the snowmelt water, singing in the ditches. Inside the Miller home, time felt frozen. Luke Miller watched his son with a heavy heart. Luke himself was a man marked by loss, but he'd never seen Ethan so hollowed out, not even after Hannah's passing. He tried to draw Ethan out, suggesting fishing trips, new books, even inviting Mrs. Benson over for supper, but nothing seemed to light the spark in his boy's eyes. The bond with Sable had been a thread tying Ethan to hope, and now that thread had snapped. Meanwhile, Grace Harper threw herself into her work with an energy born from equal parts guilt and determination. She kept in touch with Monica Pierce at Wild Spirit Sanctuary, calling every few days to check on Sable's progress. Grace's office, once tidy, now overflowed with research notes folders on Wolfdog's genetics and the legal status of hybrids in Colorado. She'd become obsessed with Sable's uniqueness, suspecting there was more to him than any ordinary hybrid. Grace's appearance grew increasingly unkempt, her hair escaping its usual ponytail circles under her hazel eyes, but a fierce light burning in them whenever Sable's name was mentioned. At the sanctuary, Sable's adjustment was slow and painful. Monica Pierce, with her deep voice and calm authority, watched over him closely. She'd seen many wolves and wolfdogs come and go, some angry, some broken, few so obviously bonded to a human as Sable was to Ethan. Monica's right-hand man, Joel Ramirez, helped with daily care. Joel, a former wildlife ranger in his mid-30s, was lean, sunburned, and quick-witted, known for his patience with nervous animals and his fondness for bad coffee. He reported that Sable barely ate, at first spending his days pacing the fence or lying with his nose pointed toward the snowy road as if waiting for a ghost to return. Monica and Joel tried every trick fresh meat knew sense, even a soft blanket Ethan had left behind. But Sable's grief lingered. Still, the Wolfdog never showed aggression. Instead, he bore his sadness in silent dignity, interacting politely with the other animals, but never seeking company. Monica noted it in her log. Sable is grieving. He's not wild. He's lost. Back at school, Ethan's teachers and classmates noticed the change. Even Benny, usually too busy showing off, fell silent when Ethan passed by in the hall, a faint thread of guilt knotting his chest. Mrs. Benson sent home notes and gently encouraged Ethan to share in class, but he mostly stared out the window at the still barren woods. The one bright spot was a letter from Monica sent through Grace. Inside was a photo, Sable standing tall, snow on his fur eyes turned toward the horizon. On the back, Monica had written, "He's waiting." Ethan read the letter every night, tucking it under his pillow as if it were a talisman. One afternoon, as the clouds rolled low and gray over White Pine, he asked his father if they could visit the sanctuary. Luke hesitated. He still worried about the attention it might draw. But seeing the quiet plea in Ethan's eyes, he agreed. The journey to Wild Spirit Sanctuary was tense with anticipation. When they arrived, Monica greeted them warmly, her broad frame a comforting presence. Joel stood at her side, hat in hand, offering a shy smile. Monica led them to Sable's enclosure, a sprawling stretch of pines thick with brush and dappled sunlight. When Sable caught Ethan's scent, he lifted his head and let out a sound halfway between a howl and a sigh. Ethan rushed to the fence, his cheeks flushed with hope. Sable, the Wolfdog, came forward, tail rising in a slow, uncertain wag, and pressed his forehead to the chain link. Ethan slid his hand through the mesh, stroking Sable's thick fur, tears slipping down his cheeks. "I missed you," he whispered. For the first time since leaving home, Sable's eyes seemed brighter, his posture prouder. Monica watched the reunion in silence, then turned to Luke and Grace. "You can visit any time. Sable's different when Ethan's here. I've seen human-animal bonds before, but never like this." Joel nodded, adding, "He's teaching the others to be calmer, like he's carrying a piece of home with him." Grace, who had quietly recorded the moment in her notebook, finally spoke. "I want to do more research on Sable's DNA. I have a theory that his genetics are unusual even for a hybrid." "With your permission, Monica," Monica agreed, eager to support anything that might help Sable heal. That evening back at home, Ethan was changed. He ate a full meal for the first time in weeks, telling Luke stories about Sable's new friends at the sanctuary, how a shy fox pup had started sharing Sable's food, and how Joel could make even the grumpiest Wolfdog play fetch. Ethan's laughter returned shy at first, then bubbling over as Luke pulled him into a rough hug. "He's still your friend, kiddo," Luke said softly. "That doesn't change." In the sanctuary's quiet, Sable slept deeply for the first time, nose tucked beneath the blanket that smelled of Ethan, his dreams at last free from loneliness. Spring finally broke through the last grip of winter in White Pine Village. The meadows were striped with muddy runoff and bursts of green, and the air carried both the scent of thaw and a feeling of restless anticipation. For Ethan, the world no longer felt so hollow. He returned from the sanctuary changed not only lighter in spirit, but with something new inside the sense that love once given could stretch across any distance. At Wild Spirit Sanctuary, life also began to shift. Sable's transformation continued. Each day he wandered farther into the sprawling pine groves, exploring the rough terrain. But he always returned to the fence at visiting hour, eyes searching the path for Ethan's approach. Monica Pierce took note of Sable's improvement. "He's not just adjusting, he's thriving," she told Joel Ramirez, her right-hand man, as they observed Sable teaching a skittish young Wolfdog how to trust human hands. Joel, whose patience with the animals had become legend among sanctuary staff, took particular pride in working with Sable. Joel was a man of quiet humor, lean from years outdoors, with wind-burned cheeks and a stubborn cowlick in his dark hair. He'd seen all sorts of creatures come through the gates, but Sable was special. A peacemaker, a leader, by silent example. Meanwhile, Grace Harper's research had started to yield surprising results. In her cluttered home office, where printouts and notes littered every surface, she stared at DNA sequences late into the night. What she found startled her. Sable's genetic code contained an unusual marker, a sequence not found in any domestic dog or typical wolf. Grace couldn't help but wonder, was there something ancient at play, some thread connecting Sable not only to the wild, but to Ethan himself? On Ethan's next visit to the sanctuary, Grace joined him clutching her notebook and trying to hide her excitement. Monica welcomed them warmly, guiding them to a shaded table near Sable's enclosure. "There's something we want to show you," Monica said, her eyes bright. Joel released Sable into the larger exercise yard where Ethan was allowed inside the double-gated space under close supervision. At first, Sable approached cautiously, as if uncertain this was real. Then, recognizing Ethan's scent and gentle voice, he pressed his head against the boy's chest, sighing deeply. Ethan, nearly overwhelmed with happiness, dropped to his knees and hugged Sable tightly. Joel and Monica watched, moved but vigilant. Grace, careful to maintain her professional detachment, began a small experiment. She handed Ethan a series of simple hand signals she'd designed, commands like sit, stay, and turn ones. Sable had never been taught. To everyone's amazement, Sable responded perfectly almost before Ethan had finished each gesture. Monica's jaw dropped. "You taught him those?" Ethan shook his head, just as surprised. "He just knows." Grace jotted frantic notes, mind racing with possibilities. She explained to Monica and Joel, "I think Sable and Ethan share something deeper than training, maybe even something genetic. I can't prove it yet, but there's resonance here, something that lets them communicate without words." Ethan felt the truth of it. With Sable, he didn't have to explain anything. His thoughts and feelings seemed to move straight from his heart to Sable's eyes. The Wolfdog responded to his emotions, mirrored his mood, even seemed to know when Ethan needed comfort before he said a word. After the visit, as Ethan and Grace drove home, they found themselves quiet and thoughtful. Grace finally broke the silence. "Ethan, you know Sable will always be part of you, right? Even if you're apart, that kind of bond doesn't break." Ethan nodded, gazing at the mountains rolling by, heart lighter than it had been in months. Back at the sanctuary, Monica and Joel discussed what they'd seen. Monica, who had long believed in the power of animal-human connections, wondered aloud if there were stories in the world, older than science legends, about children and wolves, about unbroken lines of loyalty and trust. Joel just smiled. "I believe it now." The next week, Monica invited Ethan to join a group of young visitors at the sanctuary. She'd noticed that Sable's presence calmed not just the animals, but the children too, especially those who struggled with anxiety or shyness. Ethan, at first nervous to speak, found his confidence growing as he described Sable's story, answering the other children's questions. Sable, lying in the sun at Ethan's feet, watched every movement, tail sweeping in the grass. One little girl, Julia, quiet and wary with big brown eyes and a tangle of curls, edged closer than anyone else. She reached out to Sable with trembling fingers. Sable sniffed her hand and licked it gently, making Julia giggle. Monica caught Ethan's eye and nodded. A new thread was forming, another life touched by the bond between boy and Wolfdog. That night, Grace called Monica to share her latest findings. "There's a legend among some of the old ranchers and native elders here," she said. "They say a child who saves a wolf is marked forever, a bridge between the wild and the world. Maybe Ethan and Sable are proof it's true." Spring deepened. The pines grew new needles. Wildflowers painted the meadows. And in the quiet evenings, Ethan stood at his window watching the stars rise above the ranch, certain he could feel Sable's watchful eyes turned toward the same sky. Summer arrived quietly in White Pine Village, and with it came a sense of gentle renewal. The meadows rolled green and lush beneath the blue Colorado sky, and the pines bordering the Wild Spirit Sanctuary stood tall and ancient, their shadows cool and dappled on the trails below. The air was full of birdsong and the scent of wildflowers, and even the villagers, so wary and restless in the long winter, now greeted each other with nods and easy laughter. For Ethan, the world felt open again every morning, filled with possibility. He had settled into a new rhythm: school chores and frequent trips to the sanctuary, where he was now more than just a visitor. Monica Pierce, recognizing Ethan's natural empathy and steadying presence, offered him the chance to help as a junior volunteer for the summer. Ethan accepted with awe, spending his days preparing food, cleaning enclosures, and best of all, learning from Joel Ramirez how to read the subtle language of wolves and wolfdogs. Joel's quick wit and quiet confidence made him a favorite among staff and animals alike. With Joel's encouragement, Ethan discovered he had a knack for soothing even the most anxious of the sanctuary's residents. Sable had changed too. No longer the restless, grieving animal of spring, he had become a calming anchor for the other wolfdogs. His wound now a silver scar on his leg. Sable often rested near the fence when Ethan worked nearby, but he ranged freely, greeting the new pups with dignified patience and guiding the nervous arrivals into the sanctuary's rhythm. One young wolfdog, still awkward on his paws and wary of humans, soon began following Sable's lead. Trusting Ethan enough to accept a gentle touch, then a scratch behind the ears, Monica watched all of this with satisfaction. She saw how Sable's gentle nature drew out the best in Ethan and the children who visited. The sanctuary's summer program welcomed more families than ever, including Julia, the quiet girl whose friendship with Sable had helped her overcome her fears. Julia's laughter rang out each day as she joined Ethan and the other children in walks, games, and quiet hours, sitting among the wolfdogs. It was, Monica thought, exactly what healing should look like: slow shared and full of small miracles. Grace Harper's work reached a milestone too. With Monica's support, she presented her research at a regional veterinary conference, sharing Sable's genetic secrets with a room full of experts. Some connections defy explanation, she concluded, showing photos of Ethan and Sable together. But perhaps it is in our nature, human and animal, to find each other when we need it most. Her findings sparked a wave of interest in animal-assisted therapy, and she began working with Monica to create a program for children with emotional or developmental challenges. At home, the Miller house was filled with light again. Luke Miller, seeing the change in his son, found his own wounds healing. He resumed old traditions: Saturday pancakes evenings on the porch, even a few hesitant invitations to Ruth Harper, who now sometimes joined them for supper and shared tales of her own youthful adventures. Ruth, once wary and suspicious, had become an unlikely supporter of Ethan's work with the sanctuary. Sometimes, she told Ethan one afternoon, the wild things just need a chance to show their hearts. The summer's highlight was the sanctuary's open day, a celebration meant to thank the community for their support. Monica, always thinking of ways to foster understanding, invited the village old and young skeptics and believers to tour the enclosures, meet the animals, and learn their stories. Ethan and Julia led small groups of children, teaching them how to approach the wolfdogs gently, what to watch for in their posture and eyes, and how trust could be built one quiet moment at a time. Near the close of the event, Monica gathered everyone near Sable's favorite grove. "We're here to celebrate new beginnings," she announced, "and to honor the bonds that heal us." She called Ethan forward and presented him with a simple beaded bracelet crafted by Joel and Julia from stones and bits of shed wolf fur. "You are a bridge between our world and theirs," Monica said. "Thank you for showing us what patience and kindness can do." Ethan, overwhelmed and shy, managed a bright grin. "Sable showed me," he said simply. The wolfdog, as if understanding, sat tall beside Ethan and pressed his head gently into the boy's hand. The crowd murmured, some moved to tears by the quiet display of loyalty and trust. As twilight fell, lanterns were strung between the pines, and music drifted across the meadows. Villagers lingered talking in low voices, and the children played tag among the trees, while the wolf dogs watched with gentle amusement. Grace and Monica shared a quiet moment at the edge of the grove, content in their work and the knowledge that their collaboration had changed not just one life, but many. Later that night, as the sanctuary settled into peace, Ethan found a moment alone with Sable. He knelt beside his friend in the dewy grass, stroking the wolf dog's fur. "We did it," he whispered. "We found our place." Sable gazed at him, eyes reflecting the stars overhead, and Ethan felt more than heard the silent promise that their story would never truly end. Above them, the wind rustled in the pines, carrying the sounds of laughter, hope, and the beginnings of new legends into the wide Colorado night. The most extraordinary miracles often whisper rather than shout. They come quietly in moments of courage, kindness, or an unlikely friendship that changes everything. Just as Ethan reached out to the giant wolf dog, we too are called to show compassion and trust in life's uncertain places. Perhaps that's how God's grace works, not in grand gestures, but in the small choices we make to love and help one another. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of your own small miracles, please share it. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring tales. May God bless everyone watching, and if you believe in miracles, type Amen in the comments below.